It was a Sunday night, June 9th, 1912, the kind of night you find in rural Iowa. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming summer flowers. In the small town of Villisca, life moved at a gentle, predictable pace. The streets were quiet, the houses were dark. Families slept soundly in their beds, trusting in the safety of their close-knit community. No one locked their doors back then. Why would they? Nothing ever happened in Villisca, or so they thought. But on this particular night, something was different. A shadow was moving through the darkness, silent and unseen, a harbinger of a terror that would soon descend upon one unsuspecting family. The Moore house stood on a corner lot, a simple white two-story home. Inside, Josiah and Sarah Moore were likely dreaming of the future. Their 4 children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, slept nearby. 2 young girls, Lena and Ina Stillinger, were visiting for the night, friends of the Moore children. They had all just returned from an evening at the Presbyterian church, a Children's Day program filled with songs and laughter. It was a happy evening, a perfectly ordinary evening. But as the clock ticked past midnight, an unimaginable evil crept into their home. An evil that would shatter the peace of Villisca forever. Imagine the house, the moonlight filtering through the windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the wooden floors, the gentle creak of the floorboards under the weight of an intruder, the soft, rhythmic breathing of 8 sleeping souls, completely unaware of the danger that stood over them. The killer moved with a chilling purpose, his presence a cold spot in the warm summer air. He carried an axe, the Moore family's own axe, taken from their woodshed, a tool for chopping wood, now repurposed for a monstrous act. The silence of the house was about to be broken by a crime so brutal it would defy explanation for more than a century. This wasn't just a crime, it was an annihilation, a deliberate, methodical erasure of an entire family and their guests. The killer wasn't rushed. He took his time. He moved from room to room, from bed to bed in the pitch-black darkness. He knew the layout of the house, or perhaps he was just guided by a malevolent instinct. The motive? There was none. No robbery, no obvious reason for such savagery. Just a quiet house on a quiet street turned into a slaughterhouse while the rest of the town slept, blissfully ignorant of the nightmare unfolding just a few doors down. The dawn would bring a gruesome discovery, one that would haunt the town for generations to come. Monday morning arrived, June 10th. The sun rose over Villisca, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. The birds began to sing their morning songs. Neighbors started their daily routines. But at the Moore house, there was an unnatural quiet, a profound stillness. Usually the house would be bustling with activity by this time. The sounds of children getting ready for the day, the smell of breakfast cooking in the kitchen, but not this morning. This morning the house was silent as a tomb. A neighbor, Mary Peckham, noticed the eerie lack of movement. The curtains were still drawn. The chickens hadn't been fed. It was strange, deeply unsettling. Mrs. Peckham tried to call the Moores. No answer. She went to the front door and knocked, louder and louder. Still nothing. A knot of dread began to form in her stomach. Something was terribly wrong. She knew it. She could feel it in the heavy, oppressive silence that hung over the property. She contacted Josiah Moore's brother, Ross. He arrived, a sense of foreboding growing with every passing moment. He had a key to the house. He tried the door, but it was locked from the inside. He shouted their names. No response. Just that chilling, unyielding silence. A silence that seemed to scream that something awful had happened within those walls. With no other choice, Ross Moore found a way into the house through a back door. He stepped inside, into the dim, stuffy air. The first thing he saw was the parlor. Then he moved towards the downstairs bedroom where the 2 visiting girls, Lena and Ina Stillinger, were staying. He opened the door. What he saw would be forever seared into his memory. 2 small figures in the bed, covered by a blood-soaked sheet. He recoiled in horror, stumbling back out of the house, his face ashen. He knew he couldn't go any further. He couldn't bear to see what lay in the rooms upstairs. He could only manage to tell the people gathering outside one thing: something terrible has happened. the town marshal was summoned. Henry Hank Horton. He was the one who had to go inside. He had to see it all. He walked through the house, a lantern in his hand, its flickering light dancing across the walls. He went from room to room, his footsteps echoing in the dead quiet. Upstairs, he found Josiah and Sarah Moore in their bed. In the next room, their 4 children, all of them gone, all of them victims of the same brutal, incomprehensible violence. 8 bodies in total. The news spread through Villisca like wildfire, a wave of shock and disbelief washing over the small, peaceful town. The nightmare had begun. The scene inside the Moore house was a tableau of pure, calculated terror. It wasn't just the violence that was so shocking, it was the strange, ritualistic details left behind by the killer. Each victim had been bludgeoned with the blunt end of an axe. They were found in their own beds as if they had been attacked while they slept, never knowing what was happening. But perhaps the most disturbing detail was that the killer had covered each of their faces with bedclothes after the act, as if he couldn't bear to look at what he had done. Or perhaps it was for some other, more sinister reason, a gesture meant to taunt the investigators, to add another layer of mystery to his horrific work. The killer had also taken the time to cover all the mirrors and glass surfaces in the house. Every reflective surface was draped with a piece of cloth or clothing. The windows were also covered, plunging the house into a perpetual twilight. Why? What was the significance of hiding the reflections? Was the killer afraid of seeing his own image? Did he believe in some old superstition about spirits being trapped in mirrors? Or was he simply trying to ensure that no one from the outside could see what was happening within? This bizarre act suggested a mind that was not only violent but also deeply disturbed, operating on a logic that was entirely its own. Downstairs, on the kitchen table, a plate of uneaten food sat next to a bowl of bloody water. It was as if the killer had paused after his gruesome work, perhaps to have a meal, or to wash his hands. A slab of bacon was found near the axe, which had been left leaning against a wall in the downstairs bedroom. The axe blade was wiped clean, but the handle was sticky with blood. These domestic, almost mundane details, juxtaposed with the unimaginable carnage in the bedrooms, created a scene of profound psychological horror. It was a glimpse into a mind that could commit monstrous acts and then calmly prepare a snack. The sheer audacity of the killer was breathtaking. He had entered a home with 8 people inside. He had moved through the house in the dark, using a kerosene lamp with its chimney removed to light his way, casting flickering, dancing shadows on the walls. He had killed every single person one by one without waking the others. The level of precision and control was terrifying. This was not a crime of passion, it was a cold, deliberate execution. The house itself, once a place of warmth and family, had been transformed into a macabre stage, every detail carefully arranged by a madman. The investigation began almost immediately, but it was chaotic from the start. In 1912, crime scene preservation was not the science it is today. As news of the murders spread, hundreds of curious townspeople descended upon the Moore house. They trampled through the property, contaminating potential evidence. They touched things, they moved things. It was a nightmare for the investigators who arrived later. Precious clues were likely lost forever in those first few chaotic hours. The few pieces of evidence that were collected were strange and offered more questions than answers. The killer had been careful, almost supernaturally so. The murder weapon was found at the scene. It was Josiah Moore's own axe. The killer had found it in the coal shed outside, brought it into the house and used it to commit the murders. He then wiped the blood from the blade and left it leaning against a wall in the downstairs bedroom where the Stillinger girls were found. He also left behind his lantern, which he had used to navigate the dark house. Investigators found a small piece of a keychain in the attic, but they could never connect it to anyone. There were no fingerprints, no forced entry. The killer had simply walked in, committed his terrible acts, and walked out, locking the door behind him. One of the most perplexing clues was a slab of bacon found on the floor of the downstairs bedroom. 2 pounds of uncooked bacon wrapped in a cloth lay near the axe. Why was it there? Did the killer bring it with him? Did he take it from the Moor's icebox? Some theories suggest he may have intended to set the house on fire using the bacon grease as an accelerant, but then changed his mind. Another theory is that it was part of some bizarre ritual. Whatever the reason, it was another piece of a puzzle that seemed to have no solution. Every clue was a dead end, a path that led to nowhere. The killer also left behind a bowl of bloody water in the kitchen, suggesting he had washed his hands before leaving. This act of cleaning up, combined with the covering of the mirrors and faces, pointed to a killer who was methodical and strangely composed. He had spent hours in the house with his victims, yet he left behind almost nothing of himself. He was a ghost, a phantom who had drifted into Villisca, committed an atrocity, and then vanished back into the night, leaving behind a legacy of fear and a mystery that would endure for over 100 years. The lack of solid evidence was maddening for investigators, both then and now, and in the days and weeks that followed, Villisca was a town consumed by fear and suspicion. The sense of safety that had once defined their community was gone, replaced by a palpable terror. Doors were locked for the first time. Neighbors looked at each other with distrust. Who could have done such a thing? Was it a stranger? A drifter passing through on the railroad? Or was it someone they knew? Someone who had sat next to them in church? Someone who had smiled at them on the street? The thought that the killer could be one of their own was almost too much to bear. The local newspapers were filled with sensational headlines and gruesome details, fanning the flames of public panic. The press descended upon Villisca, eager to report on the house of mystery. Newspapers from across the country ran stories about the brutal axe murders. They published sketches of the crime scene, interviews with shaken residents, and wild theories about the killer's identity. The media attention turned the private grief of a small town into a national spectacle. Every new development, every potential lead was scrutinized and debated in the public eye. The pressure on law enforcement was immense. They were expected to find this monster, to bring him to justice, but they had so little to go on. The whole world was watching, waiting for an answer that would never come. The community's reaction was a mixture of grief, anger, and paranoia. Funerals were held for the Moore family and the Stillinger girls, attended by hundreds of mourners. The entire town seemed to be in a state of shock, but beneath the surface of shared sorrow, accusations began to fly. Rumors spread like a disease. People whispered about local feuds, business rivalries, and secret affairs. Anyone who seemed a little odd, anyone who held a grudge against Josiah Moore, became a suspect in the court of public opinion. The fabric of the community, once so tightly woven, began to fray under the strain of suspicion and fear. Bloodhounds were brought in to track the killer's scent. They led investigators from the Moore house down to the Nottoway River, where the trail went cold. Did the killer wash himself in the river before disappearing? Did he hop on a train and ride away into the night? The bloodhound's path only added to the mystery. It seemed to confirm that the killer was a transient, someone with no ties to Villisca, but some people weren't so sure. The idea of a faceless stranger was terrifying, but the idea of a familiar face hiding a monstrous secret was even worse. The town was caught in a grip of uncertainty, a state it would remain in for a very long time. One of the most enduring theories is that the Villisca axe murders were the work of a traveling serial killer, a man who moved from town to town by rail, leaving a trail of death in his wake. This theory gained traction because of a series of similar axe murders that occurred in other parts of the country around the same time. In Colorado, Kansas, and Illinois, families had been killed in their sleep with an axe, their faces covered, and the crime scenes bearing other eerie similarities to Villisca. Was it possible that one man was responsible for all of them? A phantom of the railways preying on small towns that lay along the tracks. This theory points to a man named Henry Lee Moore, no relation to the victims. He was an axe murderer who was convicted of killing his own mother and grandmother with an axe just a few months after the Villisca crime. He was a deeply disturbed individual with a history of mental illness. Some investigators at the time believed he could have been responsible for the entire string of axe murders, including those in Villisca. He fit the profile of a transient killer. However, there was never any concrete evidence to place him in Villisca on the night of June 9, 1912. He remains a compelling suspect, but one shrouded in doubt. Another potential suspect who fits the stranger profile was a man named William Blackie Mansfield. He was a suspected serial killer and a contractor for a detective agency hired to investigate the murders. Some believe he was sent to Villisca to intimidate witnesses and throw the investigation off track. A grand jury even indicted him in 1916, believing he was a drug-addicted hitman hired by a local state senator who was a business rival of Josiah Moore. The theory was that Mansfield was paid to kill Josiah, but then killed the entire family to eliminate witnesses. However, Mansfield had an alibi, and the case against him eventually fell apart. The idea of a killer arriving by train is particularly chilling. The railroad was the lifeblood of towns like Villisca. It brought commerce, news, and visitors, but it could also bring danger. The thought of a man stepping off a train under the cover of darkness, walking through the quiet streets with murder in his heart, and then disappearing on the next train out, is the stuff of nightmares. It suggests a randomness, a vulnerability, that is deeply unsettling. If the killer was a stranger, it meant that no one was safe. It meant that a similar horror could befall any town at any time without warning or reason. While the theory of a transient killer is compelling, another perhaps more disturbing possibility exists. What if the killer was not a stranger at all? What if he was someone from Villisca, someone the Moore family knew and trusted? This theory centers on a man named Frank Fernando Jones. He was a prominent and powerful figure in Villisca, a state senator and one of the wealthiest men in town. Josiah Moore had worked for Jones for several years at his farm implement store, but had recently left to start his own competing business. This had created a great deal of animosity between the two men. The theory goes that Jones, enraged by the business rivalry and perhaps other personal slights, hired someone to kill Josiah Moore. The prime suspect for the hired killer was William Mansfield, the same Blackie Mansfield from the stranger theory. In this version of events, Mansfield was not a random drifter, but a hitman acting on Jones's orders. The plan went horribly wrong, and the entire family was killed to ensure there were no witnesses who could identify the killer. Frank Jones had a lot of influence in the town, and many believe he used his power to obstruct the investigation and protect himself from suspicion. He was never charged, but the cloud of doubt followed him for the rest of his life. Another local suspect was Reverend George Kelly. He was a traveling minister who was in Villisca on the night of the murders. He had attended the Children's Day program at the church with the Moore family that very evening. Kelly was an odd man, with a history of mental health issues and a reported obsession with crime and murder. He even confessed to the murders at one point, providing details that seemed to match the crime scene. He was arrested and tried twice for the Villisca murders. His first trial ended in a hung jury, and he was acquitted in the second. Was his confession the ramblings of a disturbed mind, or was it the truth? The idea that the killer was a local figure, a respected member of the community, adds a layer of psychological terror to the story. It transforms the crime from a random act of violence into a deeply personal betrayal. It means the enemy was not some shadowy figure from out of town, but someone who walked among them, hiding a monstrous secret behind a friendly face. This possibility tore the town apart, pitting neighbor against neighbor, and creating a legacy of suspicion that lingered for decades. The thought that the killer could have been a powerful senator or a man of God is a chilling reminder that evil can wear any disguise. The Villisca axe murders were more than just a crime. They were a wound on the psyche of a small town, a wound that never truly healed. For generations, the story has been passed down, a cautionary tale whispered to children, a dark piece of local folklore. The Moore house itself became a monument to the tragedy. It stood for years, a silent, decaying reminder of the horror that had taken place within its walls. People would cross the street to avoid walking past it. Children would dare each other to touch the front door. It was a haunted place, not just by spirits but by the memory of an unsolved crime and the fear it had instilled in the community. The failure to solve the case left a permanent scar on Villisca. The multiple investigations, the sensational trials, the accusations and counter-accusations, all led to nothing. There was no closure, no justice for the Moore family or the Stillinger girls. The killer got away with it. This lack of resolution created a breeding ground for rumor and speculation that has persisted for over a century. The story has been kept alive by books, documentaries, and paranormal investigations, each one trying to piece together the fragments of the past and find an answer to the unanswerable question: who did it, and why? The psychological impact on the town was immense. The murders shattered the illusion of safety and innocence that is so often associated with small-town America. If such a brutal crime could happen in a place like Villisca, it could happen anywhere. The fear was infectious. It changed the way people lived their lives. They locked their doors, they eyed strangers with suspicion, they looked at their own neighbors and wondered. The crime exposed the dark underbelly that can exist even in the most idyllic of settings, a darkness that, once revealed, can never be fully forgotten. Today, the Villisca Axe Murder House is a tourist attraction. People can take tours, and the bravest among them can even spend the night. It has become a mecca for ghost hunters and fans of true crime. But for the town of Villisca, it is something more. It is a part of their history, a dark chapter that they cannot erase. The lingering fear is a testament to the power of an unsolved mystery. It is a reminder that some questions may never be answered, and that the ghosts of the past can continue to haunt the present, casting a long, cold shadow over a small Iowa town. Over 100 years have passed since that terrible night in June 1912. A century of investigation, speculation, and unanswered questions. The world has changed in countless ways, but the mystery of the Villisca Axe murders remains as cold and impenetrable as ever. The trail of the killer has long since gone cold. The witnesses are all gone. The original investigators have passed into history. All that remains are the stories, the theories, and the chilling, undeniable facts of the case. 8 people, including 6 children, were murdered in their sleep, and no one was ever held accountable. The case stands as a stark reminder of the limitations of justice. Despite the best efforts of law enforcement, despite the intense public and media scrutiny, the killer simply vanished. He was a ghost, a phantom who slipped through the cracks of the legal system and disappeared into the annals of history. The lack of a conviction means that every theory is plausible, and every suspect is still, in a way, on the table. Was it a drifter, a hitman, a jealous rival, or a mentally disturbed creature? We will likely never know for sure. The truth is buried with the victims. The enduring fascination with the Villisca Axe murders lies in this very uncertainty. It is a perfect mystery, a story with a beginning and a middle but no end. It taps into our deepest fears, the vulnerability of sleep, the sanctity of the home being violated, and the idea that a person can commit such a heinous act and simply get away with it. The bizarre, ritualistic details, the covered mirrors, the hidden faces, the uneaten food, add a layer of a high-quality horror that fiction struggles to replicate. It is a true story that is stranger and more terrifying than any ghost story. And so, the house on the corner in Villisca, Iowa, continues to stand as a silent testament to an unspeakable tragedy. It is a place where a profound and terrible secret is kept. The silence that fell over the house on the morning of June 10, 1912, has, in a way, never been broken. It echoes through the decades, a chilling, persistent reminder of a crime that defies explanation. The Villisca Axe murders are more than just a cold case. They are a haunting, a permanent fixture in the landscape of American crime, and a mystery that will, in all likelihood, remain forever unsolved.